been inside 1,000 buildings, maybe at least, with 1,000 issues. And we're happy to have him with us this morning. So, Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Robert. Gosh, it's great to be here. What a good-looking audience. Look at this. Wow. Thank you all. First, thank you all for coming. I'm going to pay a little homage to Arthur Wilcox, for whom this auditorium is named. He's in his early 90s now, and I'm happy to report that even though he had to give up tennis a couple of years ago, he and I were sailing a couple of weeks ago, and he had the helm for 80% of the trip, and which I really deeply admire. I only hope I can do as well. I know there are a number of other people in this room who will do far better. But we're going to have a good time today. We'll even have a couple of movies. What I want to talk about, though, is how to make buildings last. Now, how many people, almost everybody's here representing a church, or most people are, is that right? Representing churches? Good. Okay. Very, very quickly, roughly, which buildings? Trinity. Okay. Okay.
Bennett Synagogue on Hazel Street.
Good.
Second Methodist on Hazel Street.
Okay.
Cathedral,
Good.
Cathedral, St. John, and St. Mary.
Okay.
St. Mark's Episcopal Church.
Good. Wow. This is great. Oops. I'm supposed to cut off my phone. I never remember to do that. There we go. Okay. Good. Let's get right down to it. Okay. I'm going to be talking about dealing with the forces that destroy historic structures. Y'all will recognize a lot of these buildings. Many of you will recognize these. Okay, let's run through these. What we're going to do is we're going to start out going through time at buildings that have had, looking at buildings that have had major structural damage or significant structural damage, if not major. First, can you all hear me in the back, or do I need to stand behind here and use the microphone?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. Okay, good. Let's look at this. 16, and I'm going to go back and forth. Is this a whole lot better or not? Yes? No? Better. Okay, I'll try and stand behind here then. Okay. 1690 to 1710. This building has suffered recently with structural damage from earth movement. 1751, St. Michael's, heavy brick masonry. This building suffered significantly in Hurricane Hugo and had, an awful lot of work putting things back together again. In the upstate, 1768, a light timber framing building up near Spartanburg. Here's one I think some of you will recognize that has had one or two fascinating issues, because these are not structural problems. This is creep, and creep in masonry. We'll be talking about creep in masonry today. The Cathedral Church of St. Luke and St. Paul, heavy brick masonry, and has had a significant soil settlement issues. The trusses were damaged as a result of that. First Scots has had tremendous number of issues. One of the more interesting things is that, let's see if I can find the pointer on here. Yeah, there we go. If you look up in here at the truss on the portico, if you climb up inside, what you'll find is that truss in particular still is smashed to pieces by a cannonball. So that's 1814. The towers are also tied together. They had some pretty significant earthquake damage. This is one that I know rather well. That's had some pretty interesting and significant structural issues. 6 years later, the fireproof building, Robert Mills, started to move on us. And we found that this thing was seeing some pretty interesting cracking. Fortunately, the South Carolina Historical Society has done a great job of dealing with the issues in that building. There are examples of one of the owners that has really taken the bull by the horns and said, let's deal with it and get it right. And they did. 1820, we've also worked on a fair number of heavy fortifications that have more than their share of problems. when you see brick walls start to delaminate like this, then you know you've got something you've got to deal with. You really don't have a choice when you get something going on like that. Fort Jefferson, I've had more fun playing with down on Dry Tortugas and done a lot of work down there. That thing has had major portions of the fort separate, and we've had to rebuild parts of those. Fort Sumter has also got some interesting structural issues, and they're dealing with them rather well. And coming a little bit into, well, I start saying modern age, both 1833 and 1922, First Baptist Church down in Savannah has had major work done in the 1920s on an 1833 building, and that caused some interesting issues. We'll look at some of those, and we can see how we can learn from those too. Oh gosh, this is a wonderful building. This is a stage set. No, not a Hollywood stage set, an 1840s stage set. This building appears to be a masonry building. The walls are about 2 feet thick. Everything more than about 3 feet above the ground is actually timber framed, designed as a stage set to look like a masonry building. Fascinating, and learned a lot from that one. Beautiful, beautiful building. We've done a lot of work on Grace Church, a fair number of things. Actually, here in Charleston, how many people are here representing buildings built before about 1840? Good, good. Masonry buildings before 1840 did very well. Masonry buildings after 1840, not quite as well. And we'll look at some of the issues that affect those. Okay, masonry walls got a lot thinner about 1840. And we had some masons come down to help us rebuild after the fire, and things went really wrong. And foundations are sort of odd there at Grace. They went down 40 inches and started laying bricks. The Stella Maris, very thin walls out on Sullivan's Island. Wonderful, wonderful church. 1845 and 1895. And one where we tied the building together. Another one that I know well, 1840s construction that didn't hold up as well here in this area as some of the much earlier parts of the building. Rand Earth, 1851. This building up in Stateburg, South Carolina, does not have masonry. Well, it has masonry, but the masonry is Rand Earth. And it has got beautiful trusses. Unfortunately, the earth let the termites get up fairly easily, and they did a horrible number on the trusses up there. Just exquisite trusses, though. Those are all repaired, though. 1886, Breslin Tower up in Sewanee. Fair bit of work on those, including, or maybe I should say, especially the pinnacles. 1891, we were just going from iron to steel. And we've got iron, that is wrought iron, cast iron, and steel, all in this beautiful, beautiful church down in Savannah. The spire reaches 225 feet. Magnificent structure. Iron does not behave particularly well over time, particularly not when it gets wet. And we'll look at that. Concrete behaves very well unless it has reinforcing in it. Oops. Most concrete has reinforcing in it. The concrete that does not have reinforcing in it behaves extremely well. The concrete that has reinforcing a lot less well. And here you can see parts of our battery that have no reinforcing and have behaved exceptionally well. And a few parts that have a little bit of reinforcing up here and have behaved rather badly. Fort Sumter House is another example where the owners realized they had an issue and did a fabulous job of once more grabbing the bull by the horns and dealing with it. And that's where they discovered that they had reinforced concrete with corroding reinforcing. And so they've taken that and repaired all of that and done a fabulous job with it. The modern buildings have their share of problems too. Here we have brick skin on a concrete frame, and did not behave particularly well. The brick grew, the concrete shrank. That's what happens. Brick grows, concrete shrinks over time. When the two are next to each other and move relative to each other, they tend to break things apart. The owners have dealt with this building really very well and have tied the brick skin back on. Now, okay, we've looked at a number of problems very quickly that have affected a number of historic structures. What I want to come to now is the causes to damage in historic structures. First, we've got natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, insect. Man-made disasters like fire and war, material movement under stress, creep. And in particular, creep affects the soils. It affects timber and affects soils more than anything else. And then finally, and this is most important, please let's not forget this one, water intrusion. Water intrusion does more damage to historic structures than every other cause combined. Not necessarily faster, but it still does more damage. Okay, we'll follow that with a look at some damage to structural materials. And here we talk about masonry, wood, iron and steel, concrete, and soil. Interestingly enough, I've put concrete in there. Most people don't think of concrete as a historic structural material. Well, it's becoming more and more so. Concrete, reinforced concrete, modern reinforced concrete, has been around about, well, roughly 100 years as a structural material. And 100 years certainly qualifies under the historic category. Okay, masonry. It deforms under stress, it moves under stress. It's damaged by corrosion of embedded iron. Keep that in mind. You can have damage to the masonry units, bricks or stone, and you can have loss of mortar. Let's take a look at a railroad station that did not perform particularly well. Here you see there's a fair bit of tilt to the walls. We didn't do that particular monitoring on that one. Let's see, do we have, not very bright, okay. Can you all see that slide? It's a little dark, isn't it? I'll move on to the next. This is a little better. I think you can get an idea here of how much damage there is when the mortar leaves the masonry, and it leaves when water moves through it. Here you can see, I think this is a pretty good example, that when the water moves through the brick or through the masonry, it tends to wash the mortar and it dissolves the lime. And what we get is a lot of loose brick, and that loose brick does not perform particularly well structurally. Here's another one where we have masonry movement under stress. And how many people have seen a masonry wall that has deformed but still works this well? This is very, very unusual. It really is. And the reason is this uses a soft historic lime mortar, and it's behaved very, very well. Even though it's moved, I don't see any cracks in that wall, behaving very well. Here we've got some embedded iron in a different structure, and we can see the corrosion right here. When we eventually took this rod out, this was a tie rod in one of the churches. When we eventually took this rod out, we found not only had it fractured the bricks around it, but it had disappeared a foot or so into the structure. It was simply gone, not doing its job. We found that, yes, structures do move. We put our borescope into things. We had a bond timber. We found that bond timber when we measured the distance from the bond timber back to the top, from the top of the bond timber back to the masonry wall, and this is a timber that's buried in the masonry wall. We had about 3/4 of an inch, but on the bottom about 3 inches. That's really odd. Well, what that meant was that the bricks on the top of this timber were displaced about 2.5 inches relative to the bricks below the bond timber.
the wall was delaminating. And when you see a masonry wall where the outside of the wall is no longer planar, then the widths of that wall are delaminating. And that's exactly what was happening here. Here I think you can see that. You see these bricks are not in the same plane as the bricks here up above. So we ended up having to tie this whole wall together. After the earthquake 2 years ago, and this was Grace Church, after the earthquake 2 years ago, unfortunately this started moving a lot more. And we closed the church. The church said, okay, great, we got a problem, let's deal with it. And they did. And we tied that wall together very well. And everybody's back in it, and it's great. Structural movement, you do see a fair bit of in-plane movement in structural masonry particularly when you have soil settlement. Anybody here representing a church that has a tower on it? Gee, amazing, a few churches have towers. You should look not at the tower, but you should look at the walls that touch the tower and are joined to the tower. When you look at those walls, you might very well find that there is movement of the tower represented in the walls next to the tower, as you see here. Okay, we sometimes instrument those things and monitor. Wood rots, gosh, yes. Okay, it also suffers from insect infestation, powder post beetles, termites of all sorts, even carpenter bees. And it also suffers from overstress. It creeps from overstress. Okay, here's some wood that suffered from termite infestation. Here we go. Not much left of that one. Even the wood lath that supports the plaster had been eaten by termites here. Here's a plaster-covered wall. You see the crack pattern in the plaster? Crack patterns are wonderful because they tell you how things are moving. Okay, this tells you that the lower right corner of this thing is moving down relative to the rest because we had creep in the wood that was supporting it. Iron and steel corrode, particularly when they're in contact with masonry and when they get wet. You saw a slide similar to this a moment ago. This same rod corroding, breaking things to pieces. Here we have some iron and steel in that 1891 tower. This is wrought iron, and it delaminates, breaks into leaves like this. This used to be a bolt in that hole down here. Now, iron and steel expand as they corrode, and when they do, they break things to pieces. Perfect example right here. Further up in the building, the same sort of thing. And here, a connection between, this is 111 feet off the ground in that 225-foot tower. And the connections right here have all been broken by water intrusion, corroding the iron, breaking up the bolts and everything. They've done a wonderful job of repairing this. Yeah, here we see some of the connections. They're all on. Okay, concrete. Corrosion of the reinforcing. Gee, there we go again. Corrosion of the reinforcing breaks the concrete to pieces. Soil gets overstressed, too much stress in the soil, too much weight in one area. The foundations move and the buildings settle. Here's Pumpkin Hill Chapel. Some of you have been there. There was a drought back in 1998 to 2002. And part of this building to the left was on piles, the part to the right was not, so the part to the right dropped as the foundation moved. A lot of damage, a lot of structural damage in there. Okay, let's look at two examples. Tell you what I'm going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this, but it's just hot as blue blazes up here on the stage, and I'm going to take off this so that I can move around. Good. Okay, here we go.
Now I'm going to see if I have to raise my voice. If it's not good enough, let me know and I'll get back behind the podium. Okay, First Baptist Savannah. We're going to look at an example here, and we're going to look at an example in Trinity, Columbia. First, water intrusion from 1833 to 1922, and then creep due to overload. Somebody at the church noticed some cracks in the ceiling and said, huh, that's odd. Well, fortunately, he was an engineer and said, I don't think those cracks should be there. He was the same engineer who had spent months, almost as a hobby, documenting the trusses up in the attic. So he knew what was there. Knew that this was a problem, called us in and said, why do we have cracks in this ceiling? Well, so we had to do a little research first. We found that the building had been designed in 1833 and looked like this. 1890s, a hurricane had taken the roof off. See those nice wood trusses up there? Beautiful wood trusses, span from one outside wall to the other. Hurricane damage, significant hurricane damage. In 1921 and 1922, the church went from, let me go back, it went from this to this. Anybody notice similarity? You see these columns? Here they are right here. Aha! Major changes in the church, not just on the front, but upstairs too, up in the attic. Here's the old truss. They raised the walls by about 4 feet, 5 feet, put a new roof up here and balanced it on top of the old trusses. The old roof was, interestingly enough, a tin roof, or what we call a tin roof. It was turn-coated metal. And the new roof was a tile roof. Now, you don't have to be a structural engineer to understand that tiles weigh a little bit more than tin. Well, in any case, we found that the trusses up there were moving just a touch. Here we went next door and looked back at the church and said, we can see the trusses up underneath the roof. What's the best tool you've got? Right here. All of y'all. Your own eyes. Best tool you've got for evaluating buildings. Easy to do. Just looked up there and said, something's not right. Significant loads up there. Creep in the wood trusses, cracks. Stuff starting to break up here and there. More cracks in the ceiling. So we went up there and evaluated the truss. Oh, by the way, there was an organ up there. Evaluated the loads up there and found that, oh yes, some of the pins that hold the trusses together had sort of a funny angle to them. Odd. And not only that, but the ends of the trusses, somebody buried them in some nice wet masonry. I've got another name for masonry, for brick masonry. I usually refer to it as a sponge because it absorbs so much water and lets that water destroy any wood that it touches, just like a sponge does. Okay. So there were signs of water intrusion. You might also note termite damage up here. If you ever see a piece of wood, looks like somebody ran a comb through it. Termites. Okay, so we started doing a little digging and got down to the base of the trusses and found we could stick a piece of wood in the base of the trusses way in with no trouble. And we found a fair bit of termite frass. Frass is a very fancy name for termite poop. And it's this yellow stuff you see on the outside of wood that termites have been chewing on. Okay. So we found there had been 1 or 2 attempts at repair. Not all of them were completely successful. You notice that the termites were happy about this one. They'd simply gone around the repair. And you could see the termite frass right there and the termite tubes going around the new wood there.
more. You see how it looks like somebody ran a comb through that? That's what termite damage looks like. Learn to look for it. There are a few problems in the trusses themselves. You see a split like this? Kind of thing that's worth looking for, particularly when it's 33 feet above your congregation. Okay, so we did some measurements, took some simple laser tools in and measured and found that the trusses sort of moved all over the place. And we did some testing. We found that we found some voids in the ends of the trusses. We've got this wonderful drill. I don't think any surgeon ever paid as much for a drill as we had to pay for that thing. But this drill plots pictures of what it finds inside of wooden members. Very nice. And told us that we had all sorts of voids. We did a bunch of computations, and I'm not going to bore you all with computations, but we came to some conclusions that told us that the truss connections, many of them were overloaded, some of the members were overstressed, but primarily we had deterioration by termites and by water infiltration, especially at the ends of the trusses. And if you look at your trusses, you'll find the same thing. Sometimes, I hope not, but it sometimes happens. Okay, so we made some recommendations. We said, first let's monitor this stuff, and then we'll do some more examination, and we'll strengthen the connections and strengthen the trusses so that they can carry the weight of all that tile up on the roof. Tile is made just like brick. Can you imagine stacking bricks on your roof? Okay, that's what tiles are. Okay, and we also put plaster washers in there to tie the ceiling back up to the trusses. Trinity Cathedral up in Columbia had some water intrusion, and the 1846 E.B. White, we've got a few E.B. White buildings here in Charleston, like the College of Charleston, the French Huguenot Church, Randolph Hall at the college, Grace Church, yes, and several others, beautiful buildings. But in any case, we were called and said, we've got a problem up here. We've got some plaster deterioration. What's going on? Not only that, but the trusses seem to be separating from the walls. These are things you can look for in your own buildings. How much time have we got? Okay, we got about 15 more minutes. So let's look at these. You see, trusses were separating. Yeah, that's the kind of thing. You need to look for stuff like that. If something looks unusual, it might be. Probably wasn't built like that. Particularly not since not all of them were doing that, just some of them. Okay. So we looked at these truss members, beautiful trusses up there, they really are, and said, okay, what's going on? Well, we found the trusses were built of many pieces of wood, and they had a tie beam at the bottom, and the tie beam had 4 facing boards on it. And we took a facing board off of one and said, oh, this is not good. I don't like the looks of this stuff. It looked like somebody run a comb through it. So we said, okay, let's look in here and see where it intersects with the walls. Remember what we call those masonry walls? Sponges, okay? Nice wet sponges. So we have these wooden trusses sitting in these wet sponges, and they've been there since 1846 or something like that, 1851. And so 160 years of sitting in a wet sponge. I would look worse. Okay, so we buried ourselves in the trusses and said, okay, what's going on? We've got some nice finishes. Let's take those pieces of wood off and see what we get. We've got a couple of short videos, and I'm going to show you. Now this is the end of the truss where it's poorly. That's about 80% of the way through the truss down at the base.
it's pretty deteriorated deep into the pocket. Whew, not good. Well, let's do this. Let's cut that off and we'll...
Okay, and tell you what we'll do, we'll look at one other. I really want you all to be... Okay.
It's pretty hollow.
Degrees of hollow.
That's a very second degree right there.
It's not completely hollow. There's a lot of damage up in there. Okay, now, let's see. Let's go up into this area. I'm gonna... Oh, gosh. Oh, goodness. Well, that goes in there. Oh, gosh.
Okay. Now, now that we've all been sufficiently impressed by the need to keep the water out of buildings, I'm going to return, if I can, to this, and we'll keep going after I swap connectors here. Let's see if this will let me back in. Yes, it did. Okay, good. And so what we found up there was that water had gotten into these trusses and had done a fair bit of damage. We had termite damage, and then the trusses were separating from the walls, the roof line was deforming, sagging, and a number of other issues. Here you can see, I think you can see the termite damage in this area, termite damage in this area, and then trusses were separating from the walls. If you're up on a roof, can you imagine that this used to be a straight line from here? Okay, now, this is the reason that you keep the water out of a building, so that you don't have stuff like this happen. We had a lot of severe wood deterioration at the masonry pockets and a lot of damage down in those pockets. I think you can see how the truss had moved, how one of the trusses had moved right here. This is a truss up against a wall. It's one of the few places where we could see how much a truss had moved. There we go. And we had a lot of crushing and splitting. Here we had the trusses right over top of the nave crossing, breaking to pieces. Yep, there we go. Hollow by that time. And so the church did a wonderful job of going in and rebuilding those trusses. They closed down for an extended period, went in and rebuilt and just did a fabulous job. Okay, we've learned that we've got water intrusion and overstress in one building and water intrusion in the other. There's no single cause of damage to historic structures that can compare with water intrusion. Now, if you want a historic structure to last other than not catching it on fire, which is surprisingly important. There's nothing you can do that's more important than keeping the water out of the building. You've got to do that. Okay, now, the obvious question is, how do you do that? I'm gonna, in about 5 more minutes, blow through the rest of these slides that show you how to do it. But while I'm doing that, I'm gonna pass out a couple of things. I've got a handout that's a summary of this talk and points you to some resources, and then I have a worksheet that you can use for evaluating your own buildings. But I'm going to point you primarily to one topic. Let's see, if you've got a masonry building, you want to inspect it and maintain it, and you want to tie the walls and the floors to the roof if they're not already tied. If you've got a wooden building, you want to keep it in good condition, inspect it and maintain it. For fire, you want to have a fire detection system and a suppression system. For termites, you want to keep the water out of the building. Have you heard that before? You want to keep the water out of the building. Okay, for creep, you want to make sure stuff isn't overstressed. That's not easy to do in the room. Let's see. Okay, for soil settlement, maybe you've changed the pattern of water movement around the building. If you have something that's really overloaded, you might call and get some professional help on that one. Most of this other stuff you can do on your own now. I'm going to point you to inspection and maintenance repair guide, so a maintenance guide. Sharon Park with the National Park Service. Actually, now she's with the Smithsonian, but was with the National Park Service for many years. Has written a wonderful little preservation brief for us, number 47, and on maintaining the exteriors of small and medium-sized buildings. I reference this in this handout, and I'm going to ask that you go on the web and find this and print a copy of it. Actually, I think there's a PDF file that you can download that's easier than printing the actual web pages. But this preservation brief tells you how to inspect your own building and how to keep the water out of it. I'll flip through it quickly. Here's a picture of it. This thing has all sorts of guidelines in it for cyclical maintenance. Cyclical, that is, on some sort of regular cycle, inspecting your building. How often should you inspect various parts of the building? How do you inspect them? She gives you wonderful guides as to how to do that, and far more than I can cover in this lecture. But she basically says, here's how to go through and inspect your whole building and take care of the problems. And then she points out gives you techniques on contracting out the maintenance and repair work. And gives you, well, I'm not going to read through each one, but gives you wonderful, wonderful guidelines on how to do this. And so I'm going to strongly recommend that you find Sharon Park's Preservation Brief, number 47. And so you go to the preservation briefs, and these briefs actually not only tell you how to inspect your building, they also tell you how to repair it, how to treat a number of the things associated, how to repair your wooden windows, how to fix exterior paint problems. Wonderful, wonderful preservation briefs, how to do thermal upgrades, preservation of historic concrete, how to rehab the interiors of historic buildings and identify the character-defining elements, how to repair historic stucco and flat plaster, preservation of historic, even log buildings. So look for these preservation briefs, and when you get to the end, you'll find that number 47, the last one, maintaining the exterior of small and medium-sized historic buildings, and that really applies to most of the churches that we deal with, almost all of the residential structures in most of the churches. Okay, sources, National Park Service preservation briefs and their preservation techniques, the Preservation Society of Charleston and Historic Charleston Foundation both have some good resources on dealing with your historic structures. And if you don't, then you go to the black box. It contains all knowledge. You go to Google.
Okay, with that, I'll put, and are there any questions before we finish up? Okay, that's it. Thank you. Dennis Dow. Yes, of course. Dennis asked if we will not stand underneath that building. So, you know, it used to be that when the shoring was taken down from a building that was being built, that the structural engineer had to stand underneath the arches and the bolts when the shoring was taken down. And actually nowadays with jack on stuff, I make a special point of being on the scaffold as the workers do, because I want them to know that things outside the confidence in this thing. Okay, thanks so much.